Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The room was dim, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting warm shadows across the walls. I could hear my own heartbeat, thudding erratically as I tried to quiet it, my skin tingling with anticipation. The night was still, almost unbearably quiet, until the creak of the hallway floor announced him, my stepson, coming to say goodnight. I froze, my hand trembling slightly as it lingered a moment too long, an unspoken desire humming in the air. He stopped just inside the doorway, eyes widening, caught in the charged silence between us. I could feel the electricity of our closeness, a magnetic pull neither of us could explain. His gaze lingered, intense, almost questioning, as if he sensed the tension threading through the room. I tried to act casual, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear, but my pulse betrayed me. The faint scent of the lotion on my skin mingled with the warm air, making my senses sharper, more alive. A soft, nervous laugh escaped him, and I realized I was holding my breath, waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to leave, but neither of us moved. There was a moment, just a heartbeat, where time seemed suspended. The air between us was thick, almost tangible, and a playful energy hovered just beneath the surface. My eyes met his, and there it was, a spark of curiosity, of something forbidden yet impossible to ignore. I shifted slightly, a subtle invitation in the tilt of my shoulder, the brush of my fingertips against the bedsheets. And then, just as he took a step closer, the tension broke in a gasp I hadn't intended to make, leaving the room hanging in a silent question: would he retreat or lean into the moment? The answer was uncertain, and that uncertainty made everything pulse with a delicious, unspoken anticipation. Ever since he moved in, there had been this undercurrent between us, an invisible thread tugging at moments, subtle and almost imperceptible. On the surface, we were just family, navigating the awkwardness of new roles. But behind closed doors, behind polite smiles and casual touches, there had always been a tension I couldn't ignore. I remembered the first night he stayed over after his father left for a work trip. He'd been nervous, polite, a little too aware of my presence. I had laughed it off, telling myself I was imagining things, but I noticed the way his eyes lingered a second too long, or how his hand brushed against mine accidentally as we reached for the same cup. Each little moment left me restless, my thoughts spinning in directions I had no business entertaining. And yet, I tried to keep it hidden. I reminded myself of the boundaries, the lines I shouldn't cross, but the heart has a way of ignoring reason. Late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I sometimes caught myself thinking about him, about how his closeness made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was wrong, dangerous even, but the pull was undeniable. He wasn't oblivious either. There were moments that made my chest tighten with longing, a glance that lingered too long, a smile that held more than politeness, a laugh that made me ache to hear it again. And beneath it all was a shared awareness, a delicate balancing act of curiosity, desire, and restraint. We danced around it without words, communicating in the smallest gestures, the softest touches, the almost imperceptible brush of a hand. The tension between us wasn't just about physical attraction, it was about recognition. We both knew there was something forbidden simmering beneath our everyday interactions, something that made ordinary moments feel charged, electric. A laugh over a shared joke, a hand resting a second too long on a shoulder, the warmth of his presence in a room, that was the language we had developed, the silent confession neither of us dared voice. Tonight, the anticipation had reached a breaking point. The dim light, the quiet room, the way he lingered in the doorway, it all pulled at the emotions I had tried so hard to suppress. Every fiber of my being was aware of him, of the unspoken desires that hovered between us, and I realized how fragile and powerful this connection was. It wasn't just attraction, it was longing, curiosity, and a complicated mix of fear and excitement that left me breathless. And as I watched him hesitate, unsure of whether to step closer or retreat, I felt the weight of everything we hadn't said. The unspoken truths, the hidden desires, and the quiet, electrifying moments that had been building for months, they were all here, hanging in the air, waiting for a decision neither of us knew we were ready to make. The soft creak of the floorboards echoed in my chest as he lingered near the doorway, hesitant yet impossibly close. Every nerve in my body seemed to tighten, the air thick with the kind of tension that made small gestures feel monumental. I caught the way his eyes flicked toward me, a mixture of curiosity and something I couldn't quite name, desire, maybe, or the thrill of crossing an invisible line. I tried to focus on anything else, the hum of the air conditioner, the quiet ticking of the clock, but it was impossible. My mind kept replaying moments from the past weeks, how he had laughed at my jokes, the way his hand accidentally brushed mine, and the small, unguarded glances that left me shivering. And now, in the quiet of this room, it all came rushing back. A pang of jealousy hit me unexpectedly. Not jealousy of anyone else, but the thought that his attention might drift elsewhere, that someone else could see what I felt and tempt him in ways I hadn't dared. I realized, in a flash, how much I craved his closeness, how every step he took toward me, every pause in the air, sent my pulse racing. He shifted slightly, and I noticed a subtle frown, a tiny tension in his jaw that betrayed his own inner conflict. It was clear he felt the pull as strongly as I did, caught between restraint and temptation. We both knew this was forbidden, impossible even, yet the energy between us was undeniable, electric. The room seemed to shrink around us, every heartbeat amplified, every breath a shared secret. His hand hovered in the space between us, a moment of hesitation that spoke volumes. My stomach knotted with anticipation, my chest tight with the awareness of what neither of us should want but couldn't stop feeling. And then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it struck me like lightning. The words weren't daring, weren't explicit, but they carried weight, the weight of longing, of unsaid desires, of temptation dancing dangerously close. My eyes met his, and in that charged silence, I felt the unspoken truth. We were teetering on the edge, and something was about to give. The moment stretched, fragile and potent, leaving everything unresolved. The anticipation was unbearable, the temptation undeniable, and the question hung heavy in the air: would we step back, or step closer into the forbidden? The house was silent, the kind of quiet that seemed to amplify every sound. Footsteps, a sigh, even the faint rustle of fabric felt magnified in the dimly lit hallway. I found myself standing near the doorway, aware of him just a few feet away, our proximity making it impossible to ignore the charged energy between us. Each glance, each subtle movement, felt loaded with meaning, like the air itself was holding its breath. We ended up in the living room, ostensibly to grab a book he had forgotten, but the casual excuse was irrelevant. The tension had become physical, a magnetic pull neither of us could resist. I felt my pulse hammering, the warmth of my own breath mingling with the faint scent of his cologne, and every nerve ending seemed alive, acutely aware of him. He reached for the book, and our hands brushed, brief, accidental, yet electrifying. I froze, the moment stretching, our eyes locking with a mixture of hesitation and undeniable longing. The closeness made the air around us heavy, thick with unspoken desire, and I realized that we were both acutely aware of how dangerous yet intoxicating this was. A playful, teasing smile crossed his face, as if he knew the effect he had on me. I wanted to pull back, to remind myself of boundaries, yet something deeper inside me urged me forward. Every slight movement, the tilt of his head, the subtle shift of his shoulders, the almost imperceptible way he leaned closer, felt like an invitation I couldn't refuse. We stood there, frozen in that suspended moment, our breathing synchronized, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. I could feel the tension coiling between us, ready to unravel, the anticipation almost unbearable. Neither of us spoke, yet the silent conversation was louder than words, curiosity, temptation, and longing vibrating in the space between us. And then, as he leaned in slightly to set the book down, our proximity reached its peak. The world seemed to narrow to the space just between us, every second a mix of hesitation and craving. My stomach twisted, my pulse racing as the moment teetered on the edge. Just as something inevitable seemed about to happen, a sudden sound from upstairs shattered the fragile tension. We froze, wide-eyed, hearts pounding, caught between desire and reality. The question lingered, unbearable: would we step back, or would this moment finally tip over the edge? The night felt impossibly close around us, every shadow seeming to echo the tension that had been building for weeks. We were alone in the living room, the warm glow of the lamp painting the walls in soft gold, and yet the air felt electric, almost unbearable. My heartbeat pounded so loudly I feared he could hear it. Our hands hovered near each other, unspoken words heavy between us, the magnetic pull of everything unsaid pulling tighter with every passing second. Then, without warning, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at it and froze, and I noticed the sudden tightness in his shoulders, the way his expression shifted from hesitation to something more vulnerable. I felt my stomach knot. Whatever it was, I knew it was serious. "Wait," he said, voice low, almost choked. "You need to see this." He handed me the phone, and my eyes fell on a message that made my pulse stop. Not from him, but about him. Someone from his past, someone I didn't know, had reached out, revealing truths I hadn't expected. Betrayal? A secret longing? It was hard to read in the dim light, yet the impact was immediate and electric. I looked up at him, searching his face, trying to reconcile the boy I knew with the layers of secrets now revealed. His eyes met mine, wide and conflicted, and in that moment, the full weight of our tension, our desires, and our hidden emotions all collided. There was no turning back, not from what had been building between us, not from the vulnerability now exposed. Instead of anger, a strange, raw intimacy took hold. We stood there, shoulders almost touching, breaths mingling in the quiet room. There was no betrayal here, only truth, truth that made the air between us crackle. He swallowed hard, confessing in a voice trembling with honesty, "I didn't tell you because I was scared. I didn't want to ruin us." And suddenly, everything shifted. The tension, the longing, the months of subtle glances and forbidden attraction, it wasn't gone. It was intensified, tempered now by honesty, by the courage to face the complicated emotions we had been ignoring. The room felt smaller, the warmth closer, and I realized that the twist, the exposure of hidden fears and past secrets, had changed nothing about the connection between us. For a moment, we just stood there, frozen in the suspended reality of possibility. Nothing was decided, nothing had been crossed, but everything had been revealed. The danger, the attraction, the unsaid feelings, they were all alive, sharper than ever. The night stretched around us, fragile and electric, leaving one impossible question hanging in the air: what would we do next? The night had thickened around us, heavy with the weight of truths finally spoken. The message on his phone had shattered the delicate illusion we'd been dancing around for weeks, forcing everything into the open. I could feel my chest tighten as I took a step closer, determined to face the emotional storm rather than retreat from it. He looked at me, eyes wide, filled with a mix of fear and vulnerability. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he said, voice raw. "I didn't want to hurt you, or me." I swallowed hard, emotions clashing inside me. Anger flared, but it was tangled with something deeper: concern, longing, and the undeniable connection that had been simmering under every glance, every accidental touch. "You should have trusted me," I said, my voice trembling. "We've been dancing around everything for too long. Secrets don't keep people safe, they keep them apart." For a long moment, the silence between us was deafening. The room, warm and softly lit, felt smaller, almost suffocating, as we confronted the weight of our choices. Then, slowly, the tension shifted from fear to understanding. He took a deep breath, stepping closer with hands open, an unspoken invitation to reconcile, to face the truth together rather than apart. Tears pricked my eyes, not from betrayal, but from relief, from the release of months of suppressed feelings finally finding air. "We can't undo the past," I whispered, "but we can decide what comes next." His nod was subtle but meaningful. The vulnerability in his eyes matched my own, and in that shared honesty, the charged energy between us softened, becoming something warmer, more real. We weren't stepping over lines, we were rebuilding trust, acknowledging desires, and choosing connection over fear. Every breath, every glance, every hesitant movement carried a weight of emotions that words alone couldn't capture. I realized then that the intensity we'd felt all these weeks, longing, temptation, fear, wasn't about crossing boundaries but about confronting the complexity of human connection. And in that confrontation, there was beauty, depth, and a chance to start anew. The night stretched around us, heavy with emotion but lighter with understanding. The danger, the secrets, the tension, they had all led us here, to honesty, to vulnerability, and to a moment of quiet resolution. We didn't know exactly what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time, we were facing it together, hearts exposed but aligned, ready to navigate the uncertain path ahead. The question that had hovered all night, what would we do next, had been answered not with action but with choice, to stay, to understand, to let the connection survive, and perhaps, to turn it into something more profound. The house was quiet now, but the silence felt different, softer, warmer, and full of possibility. After hours of tense conversations, confessions, and moments of suspended emotion, the storm had passed. What remained was a quiet understanding, a bond forged in honesty and vulnerability. We sat side by side on the couch, the glow of the bedside lamp washing the room in golden light. I felt the weight of the night lift from my chest, replaced by a calm that was almost dizzying after so much tension. He shifted slightly, brushing his hand against mine, not by accident this time, but intentionally, tenderly. My fingers met his, a subtle, grounding connection that spoke louder than words ever could. "I'm glad we talked," he said softly, his voice a mix of relief and quiet joy. "I was scared, but now I feel like we understand each other better." I nodded, smiling despite the lingering flutter of nerves in my stomach. "We do," I replied. "And I think this changes everything. Not in a bad way. In a good one." We leaned back, letting the warmth of the lamp, the closeness, and the shared silence sink in. There was no rush, no need for grand gestures, just two people finally present with each other, aware of the fragile beauty of the bond they'd built. Every glance, every subtle touch, every shared breath felt like a promise of understanding, trust, and perhaps something deeper, waiting to grow. Time seemed to stretch, the night holding us in its embrace. We talked quietly about everyday things, silly memories, future plans, little confessions that made us laugh. And yet, beneath every word, there was a lingering intimacy, a quiet acknowledgement of how far we'd come together. It wasn't dramatic or explosive, it was steady, reassuring, and intensely human. As I leaned slightly into him, our shoulders touching, I realized that the tension, the longing, the near misses and close calls of the past had led to this moment. And somehow, that made it all the more meaningful. The night didn't end with fireworks or declarations, it ended with trust, closeness, and a shared sense of warmth that promised tomorrow would be even brighter. For the first time in weeks, I felt completely at peace. The room, the night, the soft golden light, it all felt like an embrace. And in that quiet, intimate space, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, hearts aligned and stronger than ever.